Well, good morning, moms. It's good to see you here and with family surrounding you this morning. We appreciate you being here. Um, we're finishing a series that we're calling Fearless right now, and the reason we're talking about fear is because of all the surveys and studies that have been showing that our country each year is rising in the things that they are fearful of, and not only just that aspect of it, but how many of you are parents of a teenager, high school student? Okay, all right. Read a crazy thing that I read not long ago. Was the fact that high schoolers right now, the average high schooler in your home in our city, is experiencing as much anxiety now as a psychiatric patient did in the 1950s. Isn't that crazy? That's amazing. Now, when we talk about fear, there's a cousin of fear, a close relative that's an unpleasant relative, and its name is anxiety. And anxiety has a way of surrounding us and robbing us at times of our joy, robbing us of our gratitude, robbing us of our present within our lives. And it's kind of interesting because it just seems like anxiety just seems to be a thing that is growing and growing. I also read that, let me just conduct a little study here. How many of you would think that we are more anxious as a country today than we were like 5 years ago? How many of you would say we are more anxious, all right? How many of you would say we're less anxious? How many of you are anxious about raising your hand? All right, yeah, I thought there was some of there. But it's true. We are, for the last 80 years, every year our country, as the country has been surveyed, we are more anxious than we were the way we were the year before. So much so that this is the crazy thing that's happened, is that the average citizen in the United States experiences more anxiety than the average citizen in any other country in the world. We are more anxious in the United States than any other country in the United States. So I got to thinking about that, and I thought, maybe this needs to be addressed in immigration. Like the disclaimer that comes on for drugs on TV, you can take this medicine, but it may cause nausea, yada, 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 all those sorts of things. I think maybe as people are coming in the country, we may say, there's a lot of good things that the United States has to offer. We agree with that? Amen? And, but if you become a citizen of this country 1 year from now, you're going to be more anxious than you were a year ago. I don't know whether I thought that was funny. Maybe you didn't, all right? You're making me anxious about my ability to tell jokes now, all right? I remember as a kid growing up, I have to be honest, I worried a lot. I worried about school. I worried about the grades I made. I worried about getting in trouble at school. I worried about my parents finding out that I got in trouble at school, which they always did. I shouldn't have worried about that. Before I got home, they knew about it, all right? Then I got a little bit older, and I can remember as a teenager thinking, if I could just make it to adulthood, I wouldn't ever worry again in my life. Then I did become an adult, and I worried about whether or not we would have children, and if we did have children, what am I going to do with this thing called a child, my life? I mean, it was just amazing. And so our first child was born. She weighed 6 pounds, 1/2 ounce, and I thought, as I held her in my arms in the hospital, I thought, I will never worry again a day in my life. 10 minutes later, I was worried how I'm going to change a diaper, and I worried about her. And then I thought, once I get her raised or reared or whatever you say, however the correct word is, 15, 18, 20 years from now, I'll be fine. Once I get her out on their own, once she leaves home, I'll be fine. So 20 years later, the kid leaves, and I'm still worried about her. It just never ends in that area of our lives. And so we worry about lots of different things within our lives. We just can't, we just have this infinite capacity to worry and a finite capacity to be able to contain it. Worry is not our friend. Worry is something that does kind of steal our joy within our lifetime. And we worry about having kids, and then we worry about if we don't have kids, what's going to happen if we have kids, how are they going to turn out, and all those sorts of things just kind of overwhelm us one way or the other. So you may be wondering this morning as we start this whole thing, Do I struggle with anxiety? Do I struggle with worry within my life? Is that an issue with it? Here's just some symptoms of anxiety within your life. If you suffer from headaches, if you suffer from your ears ringing at times, if you suffer from tension, if you suffer from fatigue and at times leads to cramping in your legs, if you suffer from the ability at times that your neck and shoulders just feel like they're beginning to knot up and your jaw seems so tense and tired of clenching your jaw. If you suffer from dizziness, a sleep disturbance, if you suffer from chest pains or shortness of breath or dizziness or being faint-hearted at times, if at times you have kind of a tingling in your fingertips or in your toes, or sometimes your arms just feel like they're numb at different times like that, you might have symptoms of anxiety. Or maybe not. Actually, I think I've covered every pain that you've probably had in the last 10 years of your life, or at least one of those. But the reality is that anxiety is an issue that we struggle with all the time in our life. We wrestle with it because we all do that. Now, I think anxiety is a little bit like a software virus. This is for your techies. If you ever had a virus on your home computer or something of that nature, you start working on it, you don't really notice it, but all of a sudden your computer starts operating a little bit slower. At times it freezes up. It doesn't respond to your commands of doing things. If you have a tablet, if you have a phone, your battery runs down more quickly if you've got a virus on that. And that's kind of what worry does. It just kind of operates in the background of your mind, and you begin to operate a little slower than you normally. You don't respond to things as quickly as you did before. Your ability to work at full strength goes down, and it slowly and quietly keeps us from operating at our full speed. Anxiety is kind of like a big rock. Actually, it's several rocks, but it has a big rock. And I got this, and now after first service, I'm being anxious this service because I plan to carry this around through the rest of the sermon. And I decided after first service that ain't going to happen, all right? It's like a rock that we have in our life, and we begin to worry about something that grows and grows and gets a little heavier, and our tension mounts up on it, and we carry this thing around because we think, I've got to handle this. It's me that's got to handle this all the time. And so this rock I carry with me, and I think about what it is that I'm anxious about. It might be my children that I'm anxious about. It might be a relationship that I'm anxious about. It may be some sort of drama in the relationship that I have that I get to worry about. Maybe something about the future. My car, it's not working the way I want it to work, and I don't have the money to replace it. I don't have the money to fix it, and so I get anxious about those sorts of things. Or I get anxious about my parents. How am I going to help my parents in the older years of their life, and I don't know how to control when things come out of their mouth that I don't want them to come out of their mouth when they start talking. You've been there. And you just have all these anxieties that just begin to weigh with you. And you carry it around and become so noticeable within our lives that we decide what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover it up, but I know I still got to keep it with me, so we put it in a backpack. We put it in there with all the rest of our rocks of anxiety that we have within our life. And we zip that thing up so nobody will notice that I'm carrying around this thing in my life, even though it kind of wears me down by the end of the day, and I get tired of lugging this thing around all the time about things. And the stuff goes in our backpack, the stuff that we are anxious about, the things that wake us up in the middle of the night. Surely you've had that experience. You want to go to sleep and you wake up and you just start worrying about this thing. It goes over and over and over again. You just can't get rid of it, can't get to sleep, and you wake up the next morning, you're tired, and you pick up the backpack once again and you adjust it on your shoulders and you start out and you carry this load with you wherever you go. Now, what do we do when the load gets heavier and heavier and the tension increases and becomes more intense within our life? How do we handle that? Well, let me shift your attention, if you will. I'm going to shift it to two different people and something that they wrote. Both of these guys wrote in the New Testament. One guy's name is Peter. He was a companion of Jesus. He walked with Jesus for 3 years. He lived in a time when there was a lot of anxiety. And the anxiety that he felt was whether or not he would live to the next day. Because as a follower of Jesus, he went through a time, this was in a time when the persecution of faith was a big thing. But he wrote some things that are very helpful for us about addressing anxiety. Here's what he wrote, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5. He says, all of you. Now, it's interesting. The original language, the construction of this means this word, all of you, guess what it means? All of you, that's right. It means all y'all, all right? If you just put it in good Oklahoma terms. Now, all y'all, that means every one of you. Now, just turn to the person next to you and say, he's talking to you right now. Would you do that? I found first service I need to have some help here because some of you think I'm talking about somebody else. So he's talking to you. All of y'all, it's an all skate time. All of you all, clothe yourselves with, what's that next word? Whoa. What in the chili does humility have to do with anxiety? I mean, those words don't seem like they're related at all. If you were here 2 weeks ago when we started this series, we talked about the fact that fear and a place in our life, and one of the ways we are able to overcome fear is with love. And when we mention the words fear and love, we don't think those belong in the same sentence. And yet John says that perfect or mature love casts out fear. When fear tends to overwhelm you, there's something that overwhelms that fear. Whenever you learn to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, when that love for him comes into your life, it begins to force out fear. It's a fear repellent. And as your trust in his love and his care for your life grows, it pushes out that fear within your life. So there's this thing where the words don't look like they belong, love and fear, but they actually do. The same is true with this humility idea. We don't think that humility has anything to do with anxiety. But here's what Peter says. He says, after all of you all, clothe yourselves with humility towards one another. And then he says this, because God opposes the what? Proud. What's this got to do with those things? He opposes, that means that God is against something. Now, we always think of God being for us, which he does say, that he is for us, but there is something that he is against in your life. And actually, pride is a situation that kind of starts most of the sin in our life. And so, Peter says that he opposes the proud. It's actually a quote from the Old Testament, where God says, I oppose the proud. I set myself against. Whenever pride rears its ugly head in your life, whenever you think I'm in control, whenever you think, I can handle all this, you've got to realize that God is God and I'm not at all. And so the issue is when I start to try to play God and I become so proud and I become so arrogant in my life that when I carry this anxiety around, which by the way is beginning to get heavy, and I just knocked off my whole deal. I'm getting anxious about this. So he says that whenever you do this, that this pride, whenever you begin to think, hey, I'm the one that can handle all this. I'm the one that must handle it. Nobody else can handle it like I can handle it. Only I can handle it. And when I do that, the issue becomes that God cannot help us. He cannot work with us in our life, because as long as we think I can, then we move God out of the whole situation. So God is opposed to the proud, but he gives grace once again to the who? The humility ones, the ones who are able to humble. Now, so what's the difference between pride and humility? The major difference is pride says, I've got this. I've got this backpack. I've got this thing. I can handle this situation with my parents. I can handle the situation with my kids. I can handle the situation with my finances, whatever it might be that you have anxiety over. We say, I got this. I can handle it. I'm the one that's going to be able to do it. Humility says, I can't, but God can. I realize that I'm going to need some intervention within my life. I realize I'm going to need somebody to help me with this whole situation. And so whenever he says he opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble, he's saying that I can show favor. I can step in and help you handle this anxiety within your life. So pride says, I've got it. Humility says, I can't. And I'm aware of the fact that I can't control these situations within within my life. And when we understand that, then the conversation is getting someplace within our life about how to handle anxiety. Now, do you think, the question becomes, do you think that you have to handle this? Do you think that you can handle it? Or are you able to say that when it comes to whatever it is, the anxious situation within your life, that you say, I can't, but God can? And then Peter says something even more emphatic. He says it because there's going to be an outcome that flows out of this. And he says in verse 6, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's what? Mighty hand. In other words, God's got some strength. So whenever you get tired of handling the anxiety, you've got somebody who's got some strength to be able to help you. And then he said that he may lift you up in what? And that's the issue, isn't it? The issue with all of us and our fear, the issue with all of us and our anxiety is this in due time thing. Now, I've got my Mickey Mouse watch on today, and I can't find in due time on this watch. And we always, when things happen within our life, we don't want to make that in due time situation. We don't want to let the process work its way out at all. Levi Lusko, the writer, says this. He says, we think we're so good at handling things, and in due time, we think we get to set the time limit on. And we are people who can't even eat Hot Pocket sandwiches right. We put them in the microwave, and we take them out, and the instructions clearly say, wait 2 minutes for it to cool. What do? Open it up and go, and we burn our mouths. We are not people who can actually say what in due time means, because we have no clue what in due time means. And so God says he wants to lift you up, but it's in due time. And he does this, he says, because he has the things. He says, let's go to the next one. He says, cast all your anxiety on him because he, what? He cares for me. Huh. Maybe all of our uncomfortability of handling anxiety ourselves comes from handling things or carrying things around we were never meant to carry in the first place. Maybe we're trying to handle things that don't belong to us, but they belong to God. And you know what? You can give it to him. You know why you can give it to him? Because he what? He cares for you. I'm not sure we really believe that. We believe that we care about it more than God cares about it. And so we think we have to handle it. And we maybe have not even meant to handle it in the first place, you know? So how do I know he cares for me? I mean, is God kind of some sort of celestial care bear? You know, he just goes around caring for people and that's it? And if you're asking that question, let me tell you why I believe that we can cast all our cares on him, because he does care for you. How do we believe that God really cares? I mean, what has he said anything that he does? Yeah, we just read it, because he cares for us. We read it lots of times throughout the Bible, that God actually cares for us. But has he ever done anything? I mean, people say, hey, yeah, I care for you, but they don't. That sounds really suspicious, but sometimes people don't. It's just words that come out of our mouth. Is that true with God? What has he ever done to let you know and I to know that he cares for us? There was an instrument of death, instrument of punishment that the Persians first started. The Seleucids added to it and created a little bit more diabolical nature to it, and the Romans really perfected it. And it was a punishment for criminals. It was a punishment so severe that is reserved primarily for talking about people who were attacking their government. And it was a punishment just so severe that they hoped that no one would ever try to do an insurrection. It's called a cross. And that cross had the most horrifying way of death there was. Most physicians say that it's the worst form of execution because you spend so much time and pain before you actually die. And God was willing to come to this earth, and the Bible tells us that he experienced during his time here on earth, his 33 years here on earth, every temptation that we ever faced, every anxiety that we've ever faced, every problem that we've ever faced, so that he could not just have sympathy for us, but he could empathize for us in our sorrow, in our trouble with temptations, and in our failures in life. And yet he conquered every one of them. And yet he was willing to go that next step to show that he truly cared and loved you by going to the cross. And he died a physical death on the cross. We don't have to wonder whether or not Jesus cares for us or not. He actually proved that more than anybody else in history has proved that. He was willing to die for you even when your actions and your lifestyle and your behavior and your habits and your words were extremely against him. He still died for you. And so when he says, you can take off, and I'm happy to do so, and take your burden and put it at the cross, he means it. When he says, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, all of you who have things that are weighing you down, creating knots in the back of your neck and in your shoulders and tenseness and all those other symptoms of anxiety in your life, he says, you can take those things and take it to the cross, and I'll bear them for you because I care for you. I really do care for you. And I've shown you that I can care for you. Now, the question is within you and I is, where are we willing to do it? And that's why the cross is so crucial to this conversation about anxiety. It is a constant reminder that God is willing to care for us. He is willing to carry all of our stuff. He will take that burden off of our lives, and he'll take it for us. And he says, come to me, let me show you this. You can literally take whatever it is that's causing you anxiety, that's weighting you down, and you can cast it on the cross. That's what he invites you to do. You can take your worries, your anxieties. You can take the things that's keeping you up awake at night over your children or your parents or your job or whatever it might be. And he says, you can cast those on the cross and I'll carry those for you. Now, quickly, let me take you to another person's writing, because you may say, well, that sounds kind of vague to me. What do you mean cast it? I mean, how do I do that? How do I get that backpack off? Because I take it off and then I put it back on. I take it off and I put it back on. How can I get some help over that? Paul is another writer of the New Testament. He became a Christian several years after Peter became a follower of Jesus. He also had extreme anxiety on him, but he says some things about ways to handle anxiety that are really interesting. Now, I want to tell you that Paul is very direct about things. He's kind of a choleric type A guy, and so he says in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6, he says this, do not be anxious about anything. Well, gee, thanks, Paul. That really helps. I know that some of you struggle with anxiety. There's some of you in this room right now, and your feeling towards this anxiety is this: get over it and get on with it. That's just the way you do life, and that's all right. There's others of you that are worried and anxious when you don't have anything to be worried and anxious about, because there must be something I forgot to be worried and anxious about. It's just a part of your lifestyle and stuff. And so this saying to you, don't be anxious, stop being anxious, you're going, how do I do that? So Paul goes ahead and says, here's how. In every situation, by what? Prayer. So here's the deal. Your anxiety is keeping you up awake at night, and instead of just gnawing that problem and gnawing that problem and gnawing that problem, realize that that's a trigger that God gives to you to pray about that situation. God, my kids, I can't, it's not God, my kids, you're addressing God, all right? God, my kids. God, my kids are just, things are happening in their lives. I'm so concerned about them, and I don't understand, and I'm just so anxious. I want to do something, and I don't know what to do. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? What should I do? What should I do? What should I do? And you're worrying. And so God says, pray about it. You tell me. You tell me about it. Let that opportunity, you cast your anxiety on him through prayer. You actually spend some time praying on it. It's just an opportunity for you to be able to go to God and say, here's what I'm concerned about. Here's what my anxiety is. And you give it to him. Now, the real issue in this is not the fact that you haven't prayed. I'm looking in the faces that some of you who have had that anxiety, and you take off the backpack and you put it on the cross and you say, here, God, you take this. I'm not meant for this. And then about 10 minutes later, our eyes wake back up and we say, you know what, I think I need to worry about this some more. Let me put it back on. And we start worrying about it some more. Because in that 10 minutes time, God didn't do anything about it. We don't think he did anyway. You remember what Peter said? Put this under God's almighty hand, and in due what? Due time. That's the issue. What does in due time mean there? It's a process. Your prayers begin that process. But when you keep snatching it away from him, you're interfering with the process. And sometimes processes take longer than just the end of a sermon, or longer than snapping your fingers or breathing out that prayer. How many of you have ever been on an airplane and flown? Okay, can I see your hands? Almost everyone here. Do you remember what happens when you get on the flight and I started to say stewardess, that's the wrong word these days. Flight attendant, all right? The flight attendant stands up in front of the whole cabin, and she goes through all the safety deals. This is a seatbelt. Here's the way you open the seatbelt, and here's the way you close it. I get anxious about being on a flight that people wouldn't know how to open and close a seatbelt. I don't know. So they tell you about this, and so they tell you how to do that. And then there's the famous thing of in case the cabin loses oxygen, what's going to happen? Mask will fall down, that's right. If you fly on Southwest, sometimes the flight attendants they'll pick people from the deal to be, I've always wanted to be one of those people. I've got some great things I want to say. Anyway, that's beside the point. So anyway, the mask dropped down. You're feeling anxious about me getting tossed out of a plane, so I'm confused. The mask drops down. You're supposed to take the mask, and you're supposed to put it over whose face first? Your face first, all right? You put it over your face, you take the straps, and you pull them tight, and then the oxygen begins to inflate and comes into your deal. Now, if you've ever been on a plane where that's happening, you know that sometimes when it comes down, they actually say this, wait, because the oxygen will start. It's a process in due time. And so sometimes you pray and you want it to be answered right now. I want God to say yes right now. Come on, God, come on. And it's a process. And God says, in due time, my mighty hand will lift this up, take this burden off of you. Now, when is that due time? It may be tomorrow, it may be next week, maybe next month, or maybe you don't know when. But the question is whether or not you're going to trust the process. And that is the issue within our lives. We can cast our anxiety on him through prayer, but we've got to trust the process. That goes back to the first week about overwhelming love within our life. Do we love him enough to let him trust him to help us through the process? But then he goes on. He doesn't just say this. He says, he says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with, what's that next word? Paul, you are a weirdo. How can I feel gratitude when I'm worrying about this situation? I mean, it colors everything around me. I'm not happy with anybody when I'm worrying about something. Do you have a spouse that gets a little cranky when they're anxious? Don't raise your hand because they'll know about it, all right? Or you can poke them in the ribs if you want to. But the reality is our whole mood changes the more anxious we get. And so Paul says, you know what? Part of that casting the anxiety onto me, putting it at the cross, is learning to be grateful. Man. So you can cast your anxiety in by turning anxiety into gratitude. I talked with a friend a few months back when I knew that this series is coming back. She's had cancer. And I know that every person who has gone through cancer, had it treated, and even though it may be in remission or you may have someone that's cured, there's always this fear, this anxiety that the cancer might return. Am I right? Yeah, happens. And so I said, do you have that fear about cancer returning? And she said, every day, over and over again I do. So I said, what, you seem to be handling this well. What do you do? And she said, I have to remind myself over and over and over again what I'm grateful for. Otherwise, the anxiety just robs me of the joy of the present. And when I begin to speak the things I am grateful for, things that I'm thankful for, it kind of causes my fear to snap back into the reality of the present. See, I'm afraid that this might happen in the future, but when I start thinking, I am so grateful that right now in my life, that I am alive, right now, that I'm not having to undergo treatment right now, that I've got 2 kids that through this process, she said, it's just bonded us closer. We're closer now than we've ever been in all of our family's existence. And I have to tell myself, she said, these things over and over and over again. So the way you overcome anxiety is you first cast your anxiety on him through prayer. When that begins to attack you, it's a trigger to say, I need to pray about this. And secondly, it's a trigger for you to start saying, what am I grateful for right now? What is this anxiety robbing me of because I can't express gratitude because my whole focus is on this thing that might happen in the future, or I can't control it, or I can't figure it out? What am I grateful for right now? Because what anxiety and fear does is robs us of our present. And God, if nothing else, gives us every moment of every day. It's a present to us that his grace can invade into our life. So you cast your anxiety by prayer. You cast your anxiety by gratitude. You start naming things, I believe, out loud. The things that you're grateful for in the here and now, right now. And Paul says, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition and gratitude, present your requests to God. Say them out loud to him. And then he says this. He says, this is what's going to happen. He says, and then the what? The peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension. That means you think you know about his peace. When you experience his peace of allowing this anxiety and fear to release, you cannot comprehend the peace that begins to invade your life. It's just incomprehensible. That anxiety, that tension begins to melt off of you moment by moment as you begin to trust him with these things, by trusting him in prayer, by trusting him to say what you're grateful for right now in the present. That begins to melt off. And he says it will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Now, I'll tell you what I think of that. I love basketball. My favorite time of the year is March Madness. I mean, the NCAA tournament is absolutely one of my favorite times of the year. And I'll stay up to ungodly hours in the morning to watch teams that I've never heard about play basketball from time to time. I enjoy it, when we're there. But I love to see teams, because you don't see this so much anymore, love to see teams with good defense. All right, this year, both teams that were in the finals, Virginia and Texas Tech, especially Texas Tech, played great defense. And it was kind of interesting. You see these guys get down and somebody come down the court and they get down the crash, get ready to play defense. And if I could get my knees lower, I'd pound the floor like they do. But I can't do that and get back up. But they pound the floor and say, come on, I got you. And they pick them up, and wherever they go, they're guarding. They're defending them. They keep them out of the lane. They try as hard as they can. It's amazing what a great job. One of the just amazing some of the games that are played. And I think of that issue when I think about God with me praying, his peace invading my mind. It guards my heart and primarily my mind, where all this anxiety starts, in Christ Jesus. Now, my question to you is, are you implementing that stuff? Or do you just keep going back and going, oh, I'm so anxious. I've got to pick up this thing and I've got to worry about it some more and I've got to drag it along in my life. Drop it off. You weren't meant to carry it. Allow the cross of God. I mean, the cross says he's willing to do it. The cross is not the only symbol of Christianity. Biggest symbol besides the cross is the empty tomb. And the empty tomb says, I'm capable of carrying it. I defeated death. I've overcome death. If I can overcome death, if you remember our feararchy, the first week we talked about, extinction is our biggest worry, biggest fear in life. He says, I've conquered that. You don't have to worry about it. We forget sometimes that the minute we are born, this sounds so bad, but it's so true, we are in the process of dying. This physical life is not all there is. There's a spiritual side to us. And God says, I've overcome death. You don't have to fear it anymore. So don't be anxious about that. Drop it off. Not only am I capable, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to do it for you because why? I care for you. I care for you. So here's the question that every one of us has to wrestle with every single day of our life. And quite often, several times in the course of that day. What am I going to do today? Am I going to walk over in the morning when I get up, and I'm going to pick up the backpack, and I'm going to put it on my shoulder, and I'm going to carry it around with me the rest of the day? Is that a great life? No, not all. Or am I going to take my anxiety and place it at the cross because he cares for me? Which one am I going to do? I want you to do a little exercise with me. Stand up for just a moment. All right. I want you to put your hands in front of you. All right. I'm going to ask you that you open those hands. Some of you are afraid to do that because you're afraid that whatever you're anxious about is going to escape. But right now is a chance to keep them in it. So I want you to open that hand, and I want you to look inside your hands, and I want you to imagine whatever it is that right now your anxiety is just overwhelming you with. Got that? What is it that you're anxious about? Okay, I want you to close it so you have it right there. And then I want you to take it, and I want you to stretch out your hands upright. Okay? Got them up there? Now, what you're going to do is release this to God, all right? 1, 2, 3, let's release. Okay? Now, what that symbolizes, keep your hands up, all right, is your gratitude to God. I'm praying to you, God. I'm releasing it to you. I'm not going to, it's not mine to worry about. I'm releasing it to you. Sometimes little motions that we do physically remind us in our mind, our body, and our spirit of what needs to happen within our lives. So tonight, you're worrying about something. You start praying about it. Then you move out of the bed, and your husband's going to go, what? And you're going to go, do that with me. Again. That's the sound of care and worry releasing from you. Let's sing together. Oh, they're not here. Let me pray first. We don't want them to have an anxious moment in their life. Father, we thank you so much that we are able to release our anxiety to you. Father, the things that are plaguing us this Mother's Day right now, we were not meant to carry. And so, Father, show us what may be our responsibility. Show us ways that we may be able to facilitate things, but we release them to you, expecting your peace, which surpasses all comprehension, to invade our minds and hearts in Christ Jesus. Amen. Let's sing together.
Enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I will you meet me here again? I'm not enough unless you come.